What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, your home for the 2020 World Series champion Los Angeles Dodgers. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined as always by Daniel Starkand, and joined by a familiar guest to us, which is the Broom. Daniel, the Broom is back. They haven't lost since the last time you and I recorded.
Yep, we're back. The Doyers, the hottest team in baseball at the moment. I tweeted, yesterday or the day before, who knew that, getting no hit by Zach Davies would be, the best thing that could have happened to this team. But it's looking that way so far.
Yeah,
They've won not
8 in a row.
nine straight since then, actually. So yeah, they beat the Cubs 3 times, two with the Giants, and then four with the Nats. Nine straight. Ironically enough, the Cubs have lost nine straight since that game. So those two teams have gone in different directions. But yeah, it was a great week for the boys. The Nationals, they were one of the hottest teams coming into the week. So to beat them four straight, even though, they were missing Trey Turner, but the scheduling, the rain, there's a lot of unforeseen circumstances. But the Dodgers, they responded well with four straight wins. So I'm happy to bring this guy back out.
Absolutely. The Dodgers, with a 9-game win streak, are just a half game back of the Giants for the best record in the NL West, also the best record in baseball. They are 4 games ahead of the Padres, who are 4.5 back of the Giants as well. And so we got a big show, lots to cover today. In just a moment, we're going to talk a little bit about the news that broke in the middle of last week regarding Trevor Bauer. Daniel and I haven't discussed that. We're going to talk about the All-Star results. We're going to talk stock up and stock down. We're going to do weekend quotes as well as a quick look ahead. But first, let me do a quick review of the week that was. How did we get to this 9-game winning streak? This week, we saw a 2-game sweep of the Giants, a couple low-scoring games, 3-2, 3-1. Some pitching was the story there. Trevor Bauer, Walker Buehler, a pair of great outings. And Max Muncy continues to torment the San Francisco Giants. What Tatis does to the Dodgers, Muncy does to the Giants, which is a beautiful thing. They followed that up by a 4-game East Coast sweep of the Nats. Weather was the story, I would say, in that 4-game series. A 5-inning game on Thursday with a Max Muncy grand slam, a rain delay Saturday, a morning game on Sunday, kind of a bizarre one. They scored 9 runs in the 7th inning on Friday. That was a story there. And then Saturday and Sunday, I think all the credit goes to the bullpen. They sort of come out of a rain delay in a game that you and I did 2 live shows on Saturday for, and then Sunday was a complete bullpen game, complete dominance. And so, like I said, we'll get into some stock up and stock down and quotes and that kind of thing. We'll break that down. But let's get to what's the biggest story. Obviously not a story anybody in baseball, let alone the Dodger fans, are excited to be hearing about, talking about, but it's a story that needs to be talked about. It's a story surrounding Trevor Bauer. And I'll say this. I'm going to just share my thoughts for a few minutes. Daniel, I'll let you respond afterwards. And I'll preface it with this. We're not going to share all the details, because to say that the language and the events described here are a lot would be an understatement. So if you don't know what's going on with Trevor Bauer, Britt Giroli and Katie String of The Athletic have an amazing piece with tons of details. Jeff Passan and Alden Gonzalez on ESPN. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, I would say pause this video and go read and get up to speed on what's going on there. As far as where things stand today, Bauer is on an administrative leave from the commissioner's office through Monday. I would be personally shocked if that doesn't get extended a couple weeks. July 23rd is when he has a hearing set in response to a domestic violence restraining order filed Tuesday. So MLB is going to do some investigating, as well as what's going on in the legal system. So here's my thoughts. I'll be honest. I've kind of learned patience is always helpful in moments of like this, not needing to rush to judgment either in response to somebody defending themselves or in an accusation. But having said all that, as the week has gone on, Trevor Bauer's position, his defense, has gotten weaker and weaker and weaker, in my opinion. He's actually been under investigation for 6 weeks, which is kind of what led to the restraining order. His accuser was disappointed how long it was taking. But as to why it's taken so long, the lieutenant with the Pasadena Police Department said this, quote, "We were looking into some things. We thought we were nearing the end. We are not close to the end. It's bigger than we thought." So 2 data points that I found especially damning for anyone who wants to kind of try and defend Bauer. First, they have him on a recorded phone call admitting to what seems to amount to an assault while his accuser was unconscious. And second, their entire defense seems to hinge on some text messages that they allege proves his innocence. But there was a great article from Sherry Ring, who's an attorney writing for Beyond the Box Score, and she says, look, none of this matters. She can say she wants one thing, but when she's unconscious, she does not have the capacity to offer consent. She could have asked for one thing, but that never justifies assaulting someone, especially not to the degree that she was allegedly assaulted to. And if you look at the pictures, read the medical records, etc., there's a lot going on there. So I say all this not because Daniel and I are experts or we're going to legislate the ins and outs or argue over the details, but because, in my estimation, I think it's fair to assume that Trevor Bauer's time with the Dodgers is most likely over with. Or at least that's the assumption I've come to. I won't speak for Daniel or anywhere else, but that's where I'm at. And so, if what is alleged to have happened really did, and the evidence seems to suggest that it did, then Trevor Bauer has behaved despicably. He should never wear a Dodger uniform ever again, full stop. One thing I will add, because I think it's an interesting thread of the storyline as it relates to the Dodgers, is kind of where Andrew Friedman and the Dodger organization fit into this whole thing. And this might be a slight zag, but I actually think this piece of the conversation requires a bit of nuance. Bauer, as everyone knows, came to the Dodgers with some sketchy online interactions in his past before the Dodgers had signed him. Nothing, obviously, to the degree of what we're talking about today, but it was less than ideal. And so the question being asked is, should Friedman and the Dodgers have seen this coming? Should they have known? On one hand, Bauer didn't come with an unblemished character assessment, so I think that's a fair accusation against Friedman. The Dodgers took on risk, and that risk has blown up in their face. But on the other hand, I guess I struggle to jump to the conclusion that Andrew Friedman and the Dodgers should have seen this coming, as if somehow everybody knew that this was ultimately where this story was going to end. So do they deserve blame for tying up money and goodwill in Bauer? Yes. But do they deserve blame for signing a guy as if they were signing a registered sex offender who has relapsed? I don't know. That seems like a stretch personally to me. And so Bauer done with the Dodgers is the bottom line for me. I don't see how this ends any other way unless there's some massive amount of evidence that we don't know of yet. And as for do the Dodgers and Andrew Friedman deserve a ton of blame? Yes and no, I think. So I'll pause there, Daniel. I'll let you respond. I'll let you assess whatever you want to say. And then we can transition this into a baseball conversation, all the while understanding and acknowledging how trivial baseball is compared to the horror and pain involved in the situation we're describing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me just start off by saying I'm pretty much, in agreement with everything you just said. So I'm not gonna repeat it all in my own version. So I'm with you. But a couple points I do want to add. The first thing is when it comes to, sexual assault and domestic abuse, a lot of times, I know for me personally, like as a male, I don't really have to worry about that as much. I'd say, like, obviously it happens to males, but I'd say for the most part, it happens to females. So for me, when I saw what the story that Britt Giraldi put out, on the Athletic, which if you haven't, read, that's very important to this story. Like
Yeah.
that gives all the details, a lot of details that, like you said, we're not going to repeat here. But for me, when I first read that, my first thoughts or response was like I just thought about the women in my life, and if something like this would have happened to my sister or my mom or one of my cousins that I'm close with, like just just had the anger started to build up in me just thinking about that, and I reached out and talked to them to get their perspective as well, and I think that's important here, like because like I said, as a male I don't really have to worry about the fears of this because it's kind of similar to the whole to social justice and such, like as a like black people, I don't understand what they were
Yeah.
going through, like and still go through. So I reached out to a lot of my black friends on that subject, and I reached out to the women in my life on this subject, and I think they all pretty much told me the same thing. And like you said, I think we do need to wait for all the details to come out. It's Bauer's camp is trying to claim that they have some sort of evidence. Like you said, I don't think the text messages are enough personally, but I'm with you. I think the evidence it's pretty damning at this point. I don't know if he's going to be, convicted and go to jail. I don't know if he's just going to have to pay her money in a civil court. I think that's a lot of the times where this ends up. Like you said, we're not legal experts. Who knows? But I'm with you. I think he's thrown his last pitch as a Dodger just based on the evidence that we have here. Like at best, he demonstrated very poor judgment.
Yeah.
And just unacceptable judgment as not only a professional athlete and a famous person, but just as a human being. Like,
Yeah.
like not to go into too many details, but even if she said like she likes it rough or whatever, like he took it way too far, and especially with her being unconscious, like that's just not okay. I don't know what sane human being would think that's okay. So I think we're on the same page here that he's thrown his last pitch as a Dodger. At least we hope that's the case. We'll have to see, what he gets convicted of or whatever. But, I think the league is taking this very seriously. At least I hope. I know the police is taking this very
Yeah.
seriously, and I'd like to think the Dodgers are taking this very seriously. Like we've seen them in the past take a firm stance on domestic violence and such. They had a trade in place for Aroldis Chapman a few years back, and then they backed out of it. When he had some domestic violence stuff come out, and I know the Dodgers haven't exactly handled this great, to this
Yeah.
point, but I still think there's time to get it right on their end. Like it all came out, it all came out within the last week. Like this is all very fresh. As much as I'd like them to respond perfectly right away, like I get it that it's kind of uncharted territory here, and there's a lot they can't do
Yeah.
that we'd want. Like I think a lot of the fan base would like Bauer to be released right away, but that's not something that's logistic, just based on the league's rules and such. So, all I can hope is that they handle it better moving forward, as more details come out, as more facts come out. And I just hope the best for the victim. I think that's the most important thing, in this situation here. Like that's someone whose life was forever changed by something that she didn't necessarily ask for. So I mean, it's it's a very screwed up situation here. And I guess we'll just wait and see, what facts come out in the coming weeks here.
Yeah, and right as we're recording this, I mean, there was a big story that came out from Bob Nightingale, Dave Stewart, former Dodger pitcher, former Diamondbacks general manager, basically saying, hey, this isn't the organization that I used to play for. He has announced that he's not going to be coming for the 40th anniversary of the 1981 World Series team. So I think it's stuff like that that's beginning to come forward. Obviously, last week you had the moment where Dave Roberts is in a press conference and they was being asked, hey, before Trevor Bauer was placed on the list, I believe this was Thursday, hey, is he going to start on Sunday? And Dave Roberts said, it's out of my hands, and there was this outrage. And on one hand, I think there was truth to what Dave Roberts was saying, where he had to wait for MLB to do what they were going to do, and they probably waited longer than they should have. And on the other hand, yet, like, I think it's fair to say that Roberts could have done a much better job of probably explaining and sort of vocalizing what was actually going on. So, like you said, hopefully moving forward, that happens. And obviously what's fascinating is that on the field, none of this has seemed to impact the Dodgers. They've now won
Yeah.
9 in a row, which is pretty remarkable. I think it probably speaks to the character of the guys in the clubhouse, whether it's Justin Turner, Clayton Kershaw, David Price, Albert Pujols, those types of people, Mookie Betts, who can somehow keep this thing on the rails even when everything is swirling around. And so I'm sure more in this story will come out as the days go on. Again, he's on a 7-day administrative leave. He has said he's not going to appeal being placed on that list because he doesn't want to be a distraction. I would imagine that leave gets extended at least for a few more weeks after that, and then we'll see what happens. But to your point, I mean, we have to understand like the impact that this has on the organization as a whole. I remember, I live in Portland right now, and the Blazers are in the process of hiring Chauncey Billups to be their head coach. They've already hired him. Jason Kidd was another guy mentioned. Both guys who have sexual assault, domestic violence type stories in their past. And when you read the stories of people, Portland Trailblazers fans, basically saying, how can I support a team that is endorsing a guy like this? Because every time they see him, it triggers something in them that they've experienced or they've seen or just whatever. And so I think with Bauer, there's that to a much larger degree. And the Dodgers have a choice to make now. They signed him before any of this happened, but now it has happened. And so they have a decision to make. I think you and I and most people seem confident in saying we don't think he ever pitches again for the Dodgers. I don't think the Dodgers are willing to sort of say screw you to the entire media, to the entire culture, to women everywhere, and saying, well, we care about winning the World Series that much more. I don't think that's going to be the case, but we'll see how it plays out. So with all that said, I understand how awkward it is to transition this conversation to a baseball conversation, and yet we're going to do that recognizing how trivial baseball is compared to what we just talked about. From an on-field perspective, Daniel, how big of a deal is the loss of Trevor Bauer, presuming that it's going to be for the rest of the season? Obviously, the Dodgers have been able to keep their performance up, but they're about to lose a guy who there are arguments and statistics out there that you could argue Bauer has been the best pitcher the Dodgers have. At the very least, top 3. At the very least, he's one of the top 20 starting pitchers in the National League this year. So how big of a deal is it for the Dodgers to all of a sudden be without this guy on basically no notice?
Yeah, I definitely think it's it's a really big deal on the field. He's like you said, he's arguably been the Dodgers' best pitcher. He's undoubtedly been an ace for them. Like, he's been the guy who, when let's say the team has had a lot of bullpen games just because of after Dustin May went down, they didn't have a fifth starter. other starters haven't, when other starters don't go deep, he's been the guy they've been able to count on to go deep.
Yeah.
He's the only guy who really throws more than like 100 pitches per outing. Like you could count on him for 115, even 120 pitches if you needed.
Yeah.
And those are good innings too. He had an ERA in the mid twos. He hadn't missed a start all year. So yeah, on the field, it's definitely a big loss. Like he's the reigning Cy Young Award winner. The Dodgers gave him all that money because of his talent
Yeah.
on the mound. So yeah, it's definitely a big loss. And the main reason for that is they don't really have, a replacement that, you think of right away. Like this guy could step
Yeah.
in and be the team's fifth starter now. Like they don't have that. So I'll be curious to see, what they plan to do. We talked about this on the live show, the other night. Dave Roberts has made it seem like they're not, or they don't want to build up David Price to take that role. Josiah Gray just pitched for the first time yesterday, so it's going to take him some time to get built up as well. And there's not really any other prospects that are like, completely major league ready, like they could just step in and take that
Yeah.
spot. So, we will probably be seeing some more bullpen games, at least for the time being, like we saw yesterday, which, the bullpen has been up for that task all year and they've been great. But at a certain point, they start to get a little worn out from the workload.
Yeah.
So just losing a guy who you could count on for, 7 innings a start or whatever, that's definitely a big loss.
Yeah, and it is fascinating, right? Because of how quickly things go. The Dodgers felt comfortable trading away guys like Ross Stripling, Kenta Maeda in the past because of a depth of starting pitching they had. Even coming into this year, it was like, David Price projected to be a starter, Dustin May pre-injury. You're like, where are they going to fit all these guys? Where is Gonsolin going to slide in? Where does Urias slide in? Where does Price slide in? They make the decision Price is going to be a reliever. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And then May goes down. So Gonsolin was hurt too. So it was kind of like you have this stretch. Now Gonsolin is their number 4 starter, and this is a guy who still hasn't, I don't think, pitched more than 4 innings in any start yet this season.
Yeah.
He is getting built up. They think he's ready to throw about 80 pitches, and maybe that number has increased. Obviously, this last start probably would have been his longest, but the rain delay kind of messed that up. So it's an interesting place for a team that, and another thing Dave Roberts mentioned, in years past, they have been used to being able to almost coast towards the end of the season. This year, that's not going to be the case. They are in a battle for the NL West title, and that doesn't look like it's going to be going away anytime soon, whether it's the Padres or the Giants. And so it's not like the Dodgers can just throw away one out of every 5 to 10 games with a, hey, throw Edwin Uceda out there and just hope for the best. So definitely something to watch. We'll do some more stuff in the coming days, talking about maybe some options there as we get more information. But as you say, it's a big deal. The Dodgers are losing, either their first, second, or third best starter on what is the best staff in baseball. And there's not an obvious replacement internally. There's some younger guys that you pointed out. And there's even some young guys like Ryan Pepio, who had a great day. We'll talk a little bit about in a moment. But even, people are like, could he be a major league starter? It's like, the stuff is probably there. But once you get to guys like Pepio, it's, well, what's his innings limit, though? At some point, the team probably has a ceiling on how many innings he can pitch. And they weren't planning on ever using him as a major league starter this year. And so definitely something to keep an eye on. Obviously, a trade target, probably the most obvious solution out there. But an innings eater that's of mediocre, average major league quality is not going to be what Dodger fans get super excited about. So we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. Let's transition then and talk to a different subject, changing subjects, the All-Star Game. You and I did a show on Saturday. We were supposed to go live post-game. There was a rain delay. Said, hey, let's just jump on now. Let's talk about Sunday's announcement of the All-Star reserves. We know the Dodgers had no starters. Muncy and Justin Turner, Mookie Betts were some of the guys that were close but did not get voted in as starters. So we came on and we talked about the reserves. And first of all, I want to apologize because I didn't realize that the rule had changed that managers don't get to choose the last 8 spots. It's actually a committee set up. There's a quote from Dave Roberts on expecting reserves before the announcement. Unfortunately, I don't have the say or power that managers in the years past have had. They've changed it. MLB has a committee. He goes on to say, kind of understanding the year some of our guys have had, being a champion in 2020. I do expect to be well represented. I don't know what that means. I'm hesitant to put a number on it, but certainly the Dodgers will be represented. You and I talked about 8 players that we thought had compelling cases to be made to be on the All-Star team. 8 guys, pitching, hitting, whatever, to be picked as reserve. The Dodgers had 3 players selected for the Major League All-Star Game. They were not even the most represented National League team people pointed out they have the best pitching numbers in baseball and have no pitchers. And so what I want to do is I want to talk through the snubs, and I've ranked them 1 to 5. I know my rankings are different than yours. We'll just go by my rankings, and you can respond. And I want to talk about the guy that, if you follow me on Twitter, I needed to take a break yesterday because of how mad I was that Will Smith did not get chosen to be an All-Star.
Yeah.
JT Realmuto is the backup catcher for the National League. They only have one backup catcher at the moment. And when I saw that, my immediate assumption was, all right, Realmuto made it because the Phillies only have one representative. It needed to be somebody. They picked him. And then someone's like, hey, Zach Wheeler's about to be make the team. I'm like, I can't believe it. If Realmuto is not the only representative for the Phillies, this makes no sense. So let me just respond to 3 responses I've gotten to my Will Smith. I'll bust 3 myths for you, okay? So the first one is that Will Smith hasn't played enough. That's one argument. Well, this is because Dave Roberts plays Austin Barnes too much, yada, yada, yada. Will Smith has played more games than JT Realmuto has this year. He has more plate appearances than JT Realmuto this year. So that's a terrible argument. Okay, secondly, Realmuto is much better defensively than Will Smith. Wrong. Will Smith, first in defensive WAR among NL catchers. Realmuto is 6th. Smith is 2nd in defensive runs saved. Realmuto is last among 8 qualifiers. Smith is 1st in framing. Realmuto is 4th. Okay? The third one, well, what about reputation? I mean, this is the obvious one, right? The players just picked him because of the name brand, the big contract, etc. But that only makes sense if you're not paying attention. Will Smith was a better catcher than JT Realmuto last year by a long shot. He leads all catchers in WAR from 2020 to 2021. He has a better slash line in every category than Realmuto. His OPS is about 65 points higher. This year, Smith has more home runs, a higher OPS, not to mention a WAR that is almost a win higher than JT Realmuto. So I guess it speaks to the problem on Will Smith that even when I went and read some snubs columns, he wasn't even mentioned. So to me, I just can't wrap my head. I mean, can you even think of a plausible argument to justify Realmuto over Will Smith, Daniel?
No, I can't think of a single one. I think what the reasons actually are is the last thing you just said, that the name brand or whatever. We talked about that on our show the other night too. I think that's one reason, and I think the other would be kind of similar to the fan vote. Maybe the players feel the same way. It's just that everyone hates the Dodgers. I don't know what else it could be, because the Dodgers, like you just laid out all the numbers. He's been a lot better. The Dodgers as a team have been better than the Phillies. Like, the Phillies are not even 500. So I really don't understand what it could be, other than just maybe players around the league hate the Dodgers because of how good they are or whatever reason. But to me, yeah, it's ridiculous. Like, there's no argument for JT Realmuto having a better season than Will Smith. Like you said, the Phillies have another representative in Zach Wheeler, who's deserving, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, he's having an awesome year. So there's just no reason, in my opinion, that Will Smith shouldn't have been rewarded. And maybe he'll still get in. There's always injuries. So we'll see. Buster Posey got hit by a pitch and hurt I don't know if he got hit by a pitch, but I was watching the game last night, and there's one point where he caught a ball and his thumb was hurting, so he had to come out of the game. I don't know how serious that is. I don't know if it's nothing. We'll see. But he's the starter, so if he was hurt, then I'd hope at least that Will Smith would be the first replacement there. Who knows? Maybe he wouldn't even get that spot, but we'll see. But yeah, to me, Will Smith was probably the biggest, the most egregious guy that was left off for me on the Dodgers, just because when you're looking at the position, JT Realmuto and every other catcher, none of them have been better than him. So yeah, that was just ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm with you. As I said, he's the only guy aside from Buster Posey, who Buster Posey deserves to be the starter ahead of Will Smith. Let me say that. Those two guys are the only two who are in the top 3 of basically any meaningful category you want to look at. So keep that in mind. Second snub for me was Justin Turner. He has the highest wins above replacement of any third baseman in the National League. I mean, so like, if you're going to, now there are 3 third basemen technically on the National League roster. I'll say this. Eduardo Escobar, the Diamondbacks needed a representative. I'm going to get to you because I know you have an opinion about whether every team deserves one representative. His on-base percentage is under 300, for the record, for Eduardo Escobar. So shout out there. They also have Chris Bryant listed as a third baseman on the MLB.com website. He has played more outfield than third base, I believe, this year. And again,
a lot more. He started 51 games in the outfield and 22 games at third base.
So it's not to say that like they needed to take a third baseman. They could have listed him as an outfielder and still taken him. I'm not sure that totally matters, although I assume he got in by the players' vote for the third baseman. So that would be the point, I guess. The players voted him as a third baseman backup. So I guess as I'm thinking through it out loud, they had him listed as a third baseman on the ballot that was handed out. Of course, this is the first year he's played way more outfield than third base. He has been playing some outfield. But to me, it's like wins above replacement is an all-encompassing statistic designed to bring everything together and give you one number to compare people. Justin Turner's WAR is much higher than Chris Bryant's WAR. Again, if you want to make an argument for Arenado, who's a starter, fine. I think Machado belongs in the conversation. Turner is better than him in most categories, so I think Turner would have gotten the edge over Machado, who also didn't make it. But, man, this one hurts for me just because it's like he has the highest wins above replacement of any player at that position in the National League. They have 3 third basemen. He didn't make it. Now, you have beef with every team in Major League Baseball getting one representative. I'm actually going to disagree with you here, but I'll let you state your case first for why you think it's crazy that every Major League Baseball team gets one representative.
Yeah, well, before I get into that, let me just on Turner. The easy solution is put Chris Bryant in the outfield where he's been playing all year, and take out the last outfielder, who was Juan Soto, who, again, it wasn't like he was the only Nationals player to make it. Trey Turner is having a great year and made it.
Sure.
Juan Soto, by his standards, is having a very mediocre year. So if you compare him to Justin Turner,
Yeah.
it's not even close. Like if you compare Chris Bryant to Justin Turner, it's at least close. But if you're comparing Juan Soto to Justin Turner, it's not close at all. Justin Turner has been a lot better. So I don't understand. Like I get why Chris Bryant, you have to come out with the ballot before the season or whatever, so the Cubs put him as a third baseman. But when you're picking the reserves, let's get the best players out there. Like we'll figure out the positions later. Like, Chris Bryant has played double as much outfield as third base. So for Justin Turner to get screwed by that account just makes no sense to me. But yeah, let me say what I have to say here on a player from every team having to make it. To me, that's just ridiculous. Like, that's not the case in any other sport other than baseball. Like for some reason, it's just baseball decided include someone from every team. Which, like, why? Like the Diamondbacks have won like one game this whole month. Like they lost. They set a record for how many straight road losses they had in a row. Like why do they deserve to have an all-star over a team that's in the best one of the best records in baseball, in first place, been winning games all year, and has a lot better numbers? Like if you're comparing Eduardo Escobar's numbers to Justin Turner's, it's not close at all. Like Justin Turner has been so much better. The only reason Escobar is getting in because his team has to have someone for whatever reason. Like even though they've been the worst team in baseball by a mile. So to me, it's just ridiculous. And it's not only Justin Turner. Like if you look at the pitchers, like the reason, and we'll get into these guys too, like the reason, a Walker Buehler or Clayton Kershaw didn't get in is because a lot of teams had to have pitchers get in because that's their only representative, like German Marquez for the Rockies or Trevor Rogers for the Marlins, although I'd say he probably deserves it. He's having a great year. But, to me, it's just ridiculous for guys who are deserving to not get in just because they play on a good team and one of their teammates got in, like, whereas this other guy's less deserving and he gets in because the rest of his team sucks, just like he does. So to me, it's ridiculous. I think MLB needs to get rid of this rules. We want the best players in the game, not one guy from every team.
Yeah, I think my counter to all of what you said is simply that. So the reason that this only exists in baseball is because of how big the rosters are. Obviously, this wouldn't work in the NBA. Nobody cares about the Pro Bowl. So that's one piece of it. I think they are the one league that has rosters big enough, although I guess you could argue NFL as well, to do something like this. I do think it's easy for us as Dodger fans to hate this rule because the Dodgers are always going to spend. The Dodgers are always going to have stars. I went back and looked. I said, I wonder if the Dodgers have ever benefited from this rule. And there have been a handful of years when only one guy has made it. So 2012 and 2013, Kershaw was the only representative those 2 years. I don't even have to look at his numbers to tell you that he deserved to be an all-star that year. 2008, Russell Martin was the only representative. He was really good in the first half of that year. 294 batting average, 394 on base, 436 slug with 10 home runs. I can guarantee you that among catchers that deserve to be there. Brad Penny in 2006, again, 2.91 ERA in the first half, 10-2. That was one of those years where he was like on pace for an all-star or a Cy Young consideration. Jeff Kent in 2005, and then from there, Gary Sheffield 99, Piazza 97, Piazza 94, Piazza 93. So I mean, every guy I just mentioned deserved to be there at some point.
Right.
I do understand, though, the desire for Major League Baseball to say, hey, we want all these teams to feel invested. We want to attract fans. And you're not going to get Diamondback fans to watch this game unless they have some form of rooting interest. So I think it is somewhat rare that the guy is so terrible. It's so hard to find one guy. I think Escobar is the outlier. And who, by the way, Escobar is a fine player. I mean, the on-base percentage is below 300. He's fine. He doesn't deserve to be an all-star. So it's not that, I mean, I'm frustrated because of the guys who didn't make it. And so maybe I need to combine those two things and say, how do you reconcile that these guys didn't make it because these guys did? But I guess what I'll say is I understand why. And I think as a Dodger fan, it's easy for us to hate this rule simply because the Dodgers are always going to have at least one guy who's worthy. I mean, we'd have to go back more than 25 years to find any time that the Dodgers have benefited from this rule in a way where it's like, oh, shoot, we got to throw the Dodgers a bone because they've been so good. So I hear you, and I don't entirely disagree with you. I just, from my perspective, I'm like, I understand at least why the rule is the way that it is.
Yeah, no, and like you just said, I get that too from MLB's perspective. Like they want as many eyes on the game as possible. So I like you just said, I understand it, but I still think it's dumb. Like, sorry.
Pencil in Eduardo Escobar for the game-winning RBI single in the All-Star game now. I mean, and one thing I'll say here before we get going is, like, I think as much crap as we give fans for being terrible at selecting all-stars in some sports, can we acknowledge that the players suck at this too? And I remember, I think it was a Ryan Russillo podcast where he was talking to some NBA guys about voting, and a lot of those guys just vote for their teammates, or they don't even pay attention, or like they don't even turn in the ballot. So the players screwed this up. Again, Juan Soto, name brand. JT Realmuto, name brand. But they don't deserve to be there. Three more.
Yeah, and like you said, the players are more biased than anyone. Like those are their friends in their locker rooms. They got friends on other teams, maybe that they vote for. So yeah, I don't trust the players to just vote for who they think are the best players. I will say they should know better than anyone who the best players are. They play against the guys, but yeah, I don't trust them to put their personal, relationships aside to vote for who's the best. So yeah, I'm with you there. And let me say, before we get into some of these pitchers, I think it's important to say that there are going to be replacements. Like guys get hurt, some starters might start the Sunday before the All-Star game, which puts them out of contention to pitch in the game. So I think we could potentially see a few more Dodgers get in just for those reasons. But either way, I think a lot of these guys that got snubbed were deserving of getting in, from the beginning. And I definitely think it's more special to be on the first announcement when they announced the team, like to be on there, not as a replacement because of injury or whatever. Like that's still cool. That's still special, obviously, but it's not quite the same. So it's just unfortunate to see the Dodgers get the short end of the stick on this one.
Yeah, and I believe there is still one position that will be voted on by the fans. They haven't announced that group, so I part of me was wondering if maybe they've done away with that. I've misunderstood much of the All-Star selection process.
Yeah, I never understand how they're doing it. Like they change it every year. They, who knows?
DeGrom has already opted out, I believe. Kyle Schwarber is injured, so he won't be playing. So there's 2 spots on the NL side. So the 3 Dodger pitchers, again, best pitching in baseball, no representatives. Kershaw, Jansen, and Buehler. You can rank these guys however you want to. I've got Kershaw as the guy who probably deserved it most. 4th in wins above replacement among NL starting pitcher. And yet they found 8 guys to pick ahead of him. It's worth noting, pitching in the National League was absolutely loaded. I was reading one guy on ESPN who basically said you could take the next 5 pitchers from the National League who didn't make it, and all 5 would have made the AL team. Kershaw on that list. The argument against him, he's 19th in ERA. So if you only get to pick 8 guys, he's 4th in WAR, 19th in ERA. Kenley Jansen's next on my list. Hader, Kimbrel, Melanson, and Reyes were the 4 relief pitchers picked. Hader and Kimbrel are 1 and 2 in WAR. They have 1 save less than Kenley. Their ERAs are .55 and .59, so hard to argue there. Melanson has a pretty pathetic WAR, but he has 25 saves and has been really good. Jansen, 2nd in saves, has a 1.30 ERA. Reyes, 1 save behind Jansen with a 1.12 ERA. So it's hard to look at those and say there's not an obvious, Melanson, Hader, and Kimbrel, I think, are no-brainers. I think Reyes and Jansen is probably what it came down to for the 4th spot. And It's just hard to argue. And I mean, I guess if you want to argue against Melancon and his numbers being less
That's
impressive outside of the 25 saves, but he
that's
has
what I
20.
was gonna.
Yeah, he has 25 saves. Jansen has 21, and the rest of these guys have 20. So to me, I mean, I know that feels like a small gap, but when we're only talking about 25 saves, it feels substantial. So to your point, I think Hader and Kimbrel are no brainers. I think Melancon, Jansen, Reyes. I guess what I'm saying is I could see an argument made for any of those three, and Jansen was on the outside. And look, like we've watched Jansen, like the ERA is 1.30. I don't think any Dodger fan is like he's been that good. You know, like I think I think we can all be honest and say we get nervous every time he comes out still. Last is Buehler. Here's the thing about Buehler. I sit here and I would say if you said, Jeff, who's the best pitcher on the Dodgers so far this season, I think I would say Buehler. I can't find a single statistic to justify that, though. I think that's the hard part with making an all-star argument for Buehler. He's 19th in wins above replacement. He's 8th in ERA, so that's as good as he's 6th in innings pitched. But Kershaw is better in him than two of those three categories. He's 4th innings pitched. I guess if you want to go wins, which I don't put a ton of stock in, he's tied for 5th in wins. He has probably the best win percentage at 8-1. So that's the hard part. I mean, I know you're a big Buehler guy. You had him above Kershaw, I believe. What's the argument for Buehler outside of the eye test? Because innings pitched, he's 6th, but Kershaw has more innings pitched. The ERA is 8th, but he's 19th in wins above replacement. How would you make the argument statistically for Buehler?
I mean, as far as innings pitch goes, I don't know how far Buehler is behind Kershaw, but he's pitching tonight, so you could definitely add
close.
at least 6 innings there. But for me, it's just been the consistency with Buehler. Like he's gone 6 innings every single start. He gave up 5 runs in one start and 4 runs in another, and every other start other than that has been 3 earned runs or less. So for me, I think that should be rewarded. I think the ERA at 2.35 ERA, like that's awesome. Like you said,
the problem is there's 7 guys with better ERAs.
Right. And I get that. I get that with those guys, but there definitely were some other guys who like, I mean, Herman Marquez is the example I'm going to use, but I understand he was the Rockies' only representative. But his ERA is a full run higher. Mm-hmm. There's just nothing that shows he's been better than Buehler this year. And like I said, I know that they had no choice. Like he had to, the Rocky has to make it, and he's the only one having a decent year over there. But I just think the consistency with Buehler, his ability to not give up runs, I think that can't be overlooked. I get that the WAR might be a little lower than some other guys, but for me, it's all about the consistency and the run prevention. And he's got 1 loss. Like I know we don't look at pitcher wins like as a huge important stat anymore, but I think losses should be at least like looked at, or like he gives his team a chance to win every single start he's been out there. So for me, I think. And I think the reason I'm more passionate about Buehler than Kershaw is just because he hasn't been there as much. Like Kershaw's been there almost every year his whole career. Yeah. And even though it's still a special experience, like no matter how many times you go, I think for the young guys who haven't been there as much, I think it's more special. And I just think Buehler, this is really the first time we've seen him kind of put it all together for a full half a season, I should say. But he hasn't missed any time due to injury. He's given you 6+ innings every single start. So I just felt like that should have been rewarded. And I think him and Kershaw both have a good chance of getting in just because of what I said earlier about how because of injuries or whatever. And I think another guy who falls into the same category for them who's not on the Dodgers is Max Scherzer. I don't know how he didn't make it. Like I didn't even look for his name at first because I just assumed he would have been in easily. And then when I didn't see it, I was like, wait, what? Like Max Scherzer didn't make it. So I think if there is an injury replacement, I think he'd be probably first on the list. And then maybe Kershaw and Buehler are second and third. I'd have to look at some of the other snubs because I know there's a lot of guys that were deserving that didn't get in. It's pretty funny looking at the National League side compared to the American League. Like you said, there's probably 5 guys who didn't make it in the National League that would be shoo-ins in the American League. Yeah, it is what it is. But yeah, I just feel for Buehler just mainly because he hasn't been there, as many times, and he's been great all year.
Yeah, and I think just for context, the reason I think his wins above replacement is so much lower is I think it ultimately probably just comes down to strikeouts. his strikeout rate is as low as it has been. He's striking out less than one guy per inning. So I think the walk rate may be a tad higher. When I look at Kershaw, I was trying to figure out how is his wins above replacement so high if he's 19th in ERA in the National League, and the answer is because his strikeout rate is really healthy and his walk rate is really healthy. He has one of the better strikeout rates and one of the better walk rates. Buehler does not, so I think that's probably what hurts him statistically. Again, obviously, players are not looking at statistics, so I don't know what they were looking at to where Clayton Kershaw and Walker Buehler don't make it. As I said, DeGrom has already opted out. Schwarber will be unlikely to make it. So Scherzer's a guy you mentioned. Bryce Harper's been really good this year. Manny Machado, although lesser than Justin Turner, is another guy who's had a good year. So those are some names to keep an eye on as far as replacements, or, that could be a star-studded if you have like Justin Turner, Bryce Harper, Manny Machado, Max Scherzer as your last guy in vote or something like that. It could be pretty interesting. So let's shift gears. We've kind of put this segment on hold for a couple of weeks. We're back with stock up and stock down. We've put enough distance, had enough to talk about the last couple of weeks. So let's talk a little bit stock up and stock down. And I'll go first here, Daniel. Can you guess which Dodger pitcher has been the most valuable one on the roster? Wins above replacement, most valuable pitcher on the Dodgers for the last 2 weeks.
I have no clue. I mean, I would say Walker Buehler, but I'm a guess it's someone like that I'm not thinking about.
Phil Bickford, baby. Phil Bickford.
Wow.
0.3 wins above replacement.
The big.
His last 7 games over the last 14 days, 8 1/3 innings pitched. So we're talking about more than an inning per outing. A 1.08 ERA. That run came yesterday, by the way. 13 strikeouts per 9 innings, 1 walk per 9 innings. He had 10 scoreless innings leading up to his the run allowed yesterday. He's got a 1.96 ERA with the Dodgers in 18 games, 15 of those scoreless appearances. So stock up for Bickford. I mean, we talked about, man, the Dodgers need to find somebody in that low leverage type of role. Bickford's been amazing. You could argue he deserves more leverage if there weren't more guys behind him, but Bickford definitely stock up for me. Hard to argue with what he's doing. And again, this is a guy who has the pedigree. He was a really high draft pick. So it's never been a question of does he have the potential? It's just a matter of putting it together. It seems like he's found the right spot with the Dodgers.
Yeah, and that's just another credit to Andrew Friedman for finding a guy like that. Like the Dodgers got him for basically nothing. It was like a minor trade, at the beginning of the season, and here we are. He leads the team in pitching WAR over the last 2 weeks. Like who would have thought? That's just crazy. Happy for him though. He's kind of bounced around a little. You mentioned he had a high. He was a high draft pick, but for a while it wasn't exactly looking like he was going to live up to that. So good for him. Yeah, he's been awesome.
One thing real quick on that, he was claimed. I don't even think there was a trade required. He was DFA'd by the Brewers and picked up. So there you go.
All right. There we go. Yeah. My first stock up is, I feel like this is appropriate the day after the 4th of July. America's slugger, Max Muncy. He's been a stock up all year pretty much. He's just been incredible. But, since he came off the IL, you think maybe he missed some time, he might be a little rusty or whatever, but he's been as good as ever. He's got, an OPS over 1200 over the last week. He hit the grand slam in Washington. Of course, he hit a couple doubles yesterday. So he's just been incredible. We talked about how bummed out we were, that he wasn't named an all-star starter, but it's good to see he's named a reserve, at least, and that same goes for Mookie and Taylor. We didn't really mention that in the last segment, but congrats to all those guys for making the team. Chris Taylor especially, I know you were his biggest supporter there, but yeah, that's awesome that he'll be making it for the first time. But yeah, Max Muncy has just been awesome. He's been an MVP candidate for the Dodgers all year, and over the last week or two, especially he's been, at the hottest he's been. So really happy for him, and I think Dave Roberts has said that if he makes the All-Star team, he's going to be the starting DH. So I'm happy to at least see him, get in the starting lineup there.
Yeah, Dodgers snuck a starter in there one way or another. Which is Roberts does get to set the lineup. That much I know for sure. So stock down for me, a couple guys, end of the bench guys who maybe have to be worried about what the next few weeks looks like for them. Matt Beatty and Steven Souza. Beatty slash line over the last 2 weeks, 111 batting average, 200 on base, 278 slug. And again, that comes on the heels of a home run, I believe, yesterday that boosted those numbers. So you can imagine what they looked like before that. And then Steven Souza Jr., 100 batting average, 182 on base, 100 slug, his last 11 plate appearances. The Dodgers are on the verge of a roster crunch when Corey Seager comes back offensively. And so I'd have to imagine that one of those two guys is the guys who's going to be in danger. Souza's a great story but I think he's probably on the outside looking in. He's getting less playing time than Beatty. So unfortunate for them, but neither of those guys has really been able to sort of take control of their roster spot over the last couple weeks. So stock down for Matt Beatty and Steven Souza Jr.
Yeah, that's fair. I got another stock up here. And it's our guy Joseph Kelly. I'm not going stock up Joe, but I'm definitely stock up on Joseph. He's been incredible. He hasn't given up an earned run since June 8th, so
Wow.
that's almost a month ago right there. Over that time he's thrown 10 scoreless innings, 11 Ks, so he's striking out more than a guy in an inning, and he's only given up 3 hits and 3 walks. So his whip is about .6 there, which is just incredible. I know he wasn't great in his last outing. He lost his command for a bit, but hey,
Pulled it
he got
together.
out of it. He got out of it, didn't allow a run. So he's this for the first season, I could say he's like lived up to his contract, so that's been great. And also, something else that's happened in the last week, Jose came out at the White House, he wore the mariachi band jacket. That was incredible. So the full Joseph, Jose Kelly experience this season for the first time has been a good experience.
Yeah.
It's been very enjoyable. I love the guy, and I'm happy for him. It looks like he's finally healthy. That's been the main key. He dealt with shoulder issues, other issues in the past, so it's good to see him healthy. He's throwing hard. He hit 101 in his last outing, so that's been awesome.
Yeah, a couple minor ones for me to close it out. AJ Pollock, 3 home runs the last couple weeks. I know the average hasn't been there, but nice to see his bat get going a little bit. 545 slugging percentage. And then I want to give a shout out to some minor league stock up and stock down really briefly. One stock down is Yoshi Tsutsugo, which is unfortunate. This is a guy that I think, nobody expected big things, but hey, maybe the Dodgers could turn it around. You can only go on a minor league rehab assignment for 20 days. He is 18 days in. His batting average is under 200. And so at this point, I would be surprised if he does get added to the active roster. I think the obvious solution here is that he were to be designated for assignment, and maybe he can stick with the organization. But it has not been good for Yoshi. On the flip side, some guys that have had some stock up moments. Alex Vesia, a guy we've talked about a bunch, been up and down in the minor leagues and major leagues. He has struck out the last 13 batters he's faced, which is remarkable. Josiah Gray, who we mentioned, his first appearance in 2 months last night, 2 perfect innings for him. And then the real one is Ryan Pepio. This is a guy I think, I joked, might have been one of the best relievers the Dodgers had at the beginning of the season. He's still being stretched out as a starter. He threw 7 perfect innings last night before issuing a walk. Through 7 innings, he had 11 strikeouts and made just 69 pitches, which is unbelievable. Like when you just compute that, 7 perfect innings with 11 strikeouts on less than 70 pitches. So stock up for Vesia, Pepio, and Gray. Stock down for Yoshi Tsutsugo in the minor league appearances.
Yeah. I mean, the Dodgers farm system is still churning, so that's great to see. My last one, it's a stock down. It's Cody Bellinger. We've seen very limited of Cody Bellinger this season just because of all the injuries, and we still haven't seen the full, the true Cody Bellinger. He hasn't really gotten hot yet. He's 1 for his last 19. It's unfortunate. We say we want to give him time. He didn't have a spring training. He hasn't played at all this year. It's going to take him time to get in a rhythm. I mean, it's been some time now. We definitely want to see it at some point. Hopefully soon he snaps out of it. But it looked like there was one point where it looked like he was. He hit a couple homers. He had the walk off. It's like, all right, like Cody's finally here. And then after that, he's slumping again. He's chasing those high pitches that he's never really had success within his career. So it's unfortunate. At least I will say, at least he's still playing great defense. Like just having him out there in center field is a huge difference compared to, when he was out, the defense the Dodgers were getting. So that's a positive at least, but still waiting for Cody to get going with the bat.
Yeah, it's too bad. And I mean, Schmaltz, look, nobody here is a John Schmaltz fan, but he did make a great point where it's like, when you watch Cody Bellinger swing, it does feel like an all or nothing proposition. It doesn't feel like the type of, it generates the type of consistency maybe that you see with some other guy, a guy like Mookie Betts, who even when he's slumping, it doesn't ever feel like he's completely lost control. Sometimes you watch Bellinger go up there and you're like, man, I don't even think we're close on some of these swings. So hopefully he gets it figured out. I mean, I'm sure he will. Obviously, it's been a weird season for him adjusting back and forth. And so we'll look forward to hopefully him getting that thing back on the rails. A couple odds and ends from the week in quotes, and then we'll get to the Marlins and the Diamondbacks week ahead. One note and update on that everybody's always asking about, Corey Seager update. Not necessarily good news on this front. Dave Roberts on July 1st was asked about it. He said no guarantee that Seager is back on day one after the All-Star break. It sounds like Seager is still not swinging or taking live at bats, and we're not that far away from we're about 2 weeks away from the end of the All-Star break, and so not swinging or taking live at bats less than 2 weeks away, a little bit concerning there. We know the Dodgers are going to play it safely. I think it's fair to say, Daniel, that obviously you need Corey Seager. You want Corey Seager. The Dodgers seem to be doing okay without him, so they can take a little bit more patient approach. Would you say?
Yeah, I'd say winning 9 straight games is pretty solid. But yeah, no, I'm with you there. I don't think there's any reason to rush Corey Seager back, especially with, Lux's defense was a concern when he first moved over to short, but he's been really good over there lately. He's been making some nice plays. He's been making the routine plays as well, which is good. So even though Lux's bat hasn't necessarily been stellar, at least the defense is still there, and the guys they've had at second base, whether it be Chris Taylor, Zach McKinstry, those are solid options right there. So there's no reason to rush Corey Seager back, but at the end of the day, we still want to see him back in there just because we haven't seen the full Dodgers lineup like at all this year. Like I think it's been like 3 games, and it was the first 3 games of the season. So hopefully he's back. If it's not the first game after the All-Star break, hopefully shortly after.
Yeah. Here's another quote. You referenced this one. This was Max Muncy on All-Star voting when the Dodgers, it was announced, we're not going to get any starters. Quote, "It is what it is. Fans didn't feel I deserved a spot, so that's really all it was. I know Dodger fans were out there doing their best. Unfortunately, it's a lot of the country against us. But thank you to all the Dodger fans that did vote, not just for me, but all of us. We really appreciated it. It was unfortunate, but we really did appreciate everyone that got out there to vote." You hinted at this. Muncy hints at it too. Do you really think that the nation hates the Dodgers? Like, do you think there is, maybe not like, I don't know, like this idea that the Dodgers are somehow being treated unfairly or negatively because of who they are? I don't know. I guess I know lots of Giant fans who hate us. I know lots of Padre fans who hate us. I'm just wondering, like, do Nationals fans hate us? Do Brewers fans hate us? I mean, maybe. I guess we beat a bunch of teams in the playoffs over the last few years. We have the biggest payroll. I mean, is it that simple for you?
Yeah, I think that's just the downside to, being so good, which we'll take that any day. Like I'd take winning games over all-star selection. So like at the end of the day, I'm not that bummed over it, but I definitely think it's a bit of a case of that. Kind of like, the evil Empire Yankees of the late 90s and early 2000s. Like when you're winning a lot of games and spending more money than everyone else, like fans of other teams and players around the league, like they're not going to like that. Like it is what it is. Like I don't think the Dodgers have individual players that are like hated, like necessarily, like they don't have bad guys. Yeah, Bauer obviously, but outside of that, like I don't think that clubhouse is full of like just bad guys. Like I think they're all good guys, but when they perform the way they do, when they win as many games as they do, like other places are not gonna like them necessarily, especially in the NL West. Like I know you mentioned Giants fans, but I know basically every NL West team, the fans hate the Dodgers. That's one thing I know for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it is like we've knocked the Nationals out of the playoffs. We've knocked the Brewers out of the playoffs. Like we've knocked the Braves out of the playoffs.
Braves,
like you have all these teams that the Dodgers have kind of owned for the past 4 or 5 years in the postseason. And that probably comes back to, and I think about how much I hated like the Cardinals, like 7 or 8 years ago, because they kept knocking us out. So the Dodgers are now that team, but for a bunch of different organizations. A couple more here. This is one, David Price. Will he be a starting pitcher? Dave Roberts said, "It's possible. I don't know if it's practical. Something we'll probably talk about, just knowing where we're at until we get to the break. It's going to be 2 days where we need a starter, so there's not a whole lot you can do in that time. Something we'll talk about and see if it makes sense." So the 2 days was in reference to Sunday's outing. He was saying, hey, we're not going to be able to stretch him out before Sunday, but it does seem like the door is open to the possibility of stretching out David Price. You and I talked about this on the postgame show. I think we both are in favor of it. Like he's coming off a year in which he didn't pitch. He was a really successful starter 2 years ago. So it's not like a Jimmy Nelson situation where there's an injury history that you're worried about. He was a really successful, like sort of underlying metrics guy in Boston 2 years ago. He sits out all of last year. He's been successful. He's been fine. He's been healthy. He is pitching 2 or 3 innings. To me, it seems to make a lot of sense, especially when you consider the alternatives. And it does feel like Dave Roberts in this quote, which I believe was from Friday, left the door open for something.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes a ton of sense. Like, especially right now, given the current state of things, like the team needs a starter, that's obvious. But if you look at the overall state of the bullpen,
Yeah.
like it's the best it's been all year. Like you just mentioned Phil Bickford, like he's him and Garrett Clevenger are like the low guys on the totem pole. I mean, Edwin Uceda's there now, but he took Gratterall's spot, so
Yeah.
well, I'm sure Gratterall will be back up at some point. But I think the overall state of the bullpen right now is really good. So you could actually afford to, take David Price out of there and move him to the rotation. And I think now is the perfect time to do it just because with the All-Star break coming up, you could use that week to help build him up too. Like he threw 2 innings yesterday. They're going to have another bullpen game coming up this week because they have no
Friday.
off days. They got 7 games. So maybe he throws 3 innings in that game. Then you're at the All-Star break. Maybe he has like a 4 inning simulated game during that. And then coming out of the All-Star break, he's already at like 4 or 5 innings.
Yeah.
So then like there you have it. Like I think now's the time to do it just because you limited his innings by having him in the bullpen in the first half. So it's not a workload issue. Like this is a guy who's been a starter his whole career. I know he took last year off, but if he throws if he throws, 80 innings in the second half, that puts him at like slightly over 100 for the year, which is not anything egregious for a guy who's been a career starter. So I definitely think now's the time to do it. I mean, the caveat would be if you're going to trade for a starter, then I guess that would fill that role. But given the uncertainty with Gonsolin, he hasn't been a full starter this year, and
Yeah.
as of now, he'd be your fourth starter in the postseason. I don't exactly know how comfortable you are with that. So I don't
That's
see
a
I
great
don't
point.
see any reason to not give it a try with David Price. He's healthy, So yeah, I definitely think now's the time to do it, and I hope they do.
Yeah, and the lefty balances things out. If you're talking about a postseason rotation as well, obviously you've got Kershaw as one lefty. Yeah, it's worth. I mean, like, is David Price a better option than the guys who are going to be available on the trade market? Almost assuredly equal to, or yes, better than.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's not like it would be costing them a ton because Scott Alexander's another guy who's coming back. So even if
Yeah.
Alexander takes Clevenger's spot and a guy like Gratterall were able to take Uceda's spot, then all of a sudden the bullpen is fully loaded and can
Yeah.
afford. Not to mention, I mean, maybe it's an easier entrance point for a guy like Josiah Gray or for a guy like Ryan Pepio if you wanted to bring one of them up to get a taste of the major leagues, Andre Jack, whoever it might be. Maybe you slide them into the bullpen and let them fill the David Price role as a way to get their feet wet. Could be something there. So last quote here. This was a funny one. Max Muncy was asked how much caffeine was needed for Sunday's 8 a.m. West Coast game after Saturday night's rain delay game. I don't know if there was enough caffeine, he says. Rough day. I don't know who thought it was ever a good idea to have a 7:15 p.m. Eastern game and follow it up with an 11 a.m. game. That's probably one of the worst decisions I've ever seen. That's how guys get hurt. Thankfully, none of that happened today. Gavin Lux was later asked how much sleep he got. He said 5 hours of sleep. I hope these guys all know that there is a 9 a.m. West Coast game coming up on Thursday in Miami.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I think the same situation. Maybe it's a 6 p.m. Eastern instead of 7 p.m. Eastern the night before. Hopefully, no rain delays there. But just a funny
They got
situation.
a roof. They got a roof in Miami.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So that leads us into this upcoming week of games. As you said, 7 full games. It's the last 7 games before the All-Star break. I'll throw a plug in real quick. The MLB draft is next Sunday. Justin Lorber and I are going to be doing a full breakdown on Friday ahead of the draft, things to look for, trends, prospects, rumors, etc. And then he and I will have a bunch of post-draft coverage as well. I believe round 1 is on Sunday, and then rounds 2 and 3 maybe on Monday. So stay tuned for that. But this week, as far as the baseball games, they have 4 more games in their East Coast swing, all against the Marlins, all early games. 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock type games. And then Thursday, as I said, a 9 a.m. West Coast game. So get prepared for that one. The Marlins, 12 games under 500. They've lost 8 of their last 12. They did take 2 out of 3 against the Dodgers in May, though. And it is a road game. So it would be pretty impressive if the Dodgers could sweep an 8-game East Coast road trip. That would be impressive.
Yeah.
Then they return home for 3 more against the Diamondbacks. Friday is when there would be another bullpen game. That's when Bauer's spot would be due up. The Diamondbacks, I believe, 6-44 in their last 50 games. So we're talking about a 9-game winning streak with 7 more games against teams that are bad to atrocious. I'm not saying we're going to be looking at a 16-game win streak, but I usually ask you, how are you expecting to see this week play out? 7 games. I mean, 6-1, anything less than 6-1 is probably disappointing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess at worst you take 5-2. Like
Yeah.
that
Split in
that's you.
Miami and
Yeah. Yeah, you take 3 out of 4 from Miami, 2 out of 3 from the Diamondbacks. Like that's solid. Like you'll take that. But yeah, definitely when you see those teams on the schedule, you definitely want to start racking up the wins, especially considering, they just went through, maybe the toughest part of their schedule. Like they played some really good
Yeah,
teams. The Nationals were coming in hot,
Braves.
the Giants and Padres, we know who they are. The Cubs they were coming in
They
hot
were
as well.
good.
The Dodgers cooled them off, and they've stayed cool since. But yeah, this is definitely a part of the schedule that you look at and say, hey, how many wins can we rack up here? I don't think it's out of the question to go 7-0. Considering the teams they're facing. But yeah, 6-1 would be great. 5-2 is like worse. Like, all right, like fine, But like, yeah, ideally 6-1, and who knows, maybe 7-0. Like, let's go. Why not? Why not go into the All-Star break? As hot as can
Yeah,
be.
and then they come out of the All-Star break with 3 games against Colorado, 4 games against the Giants, 3 more games against Colorado, and then 3 more games against the Giants before 3 more in Arizona. So you're talking about the first 5 series after the All-Star break. You get Diamondbacks, Rockies, and Rockies, 3 out of those 5, plus a Giants team. That's going to be really good. So I'm not including the Giants in that category, other than to
Yeah.
say 5 of your next 7 series are against, again, bad to very bad teams. And so
Yeah.
definitely something to watch.
Very, very
Yeah,
much.
exactly. Maybe very bad is not is underselling the Diamondbacks there. So, well, hey, that'll do it for us today. We appreciate you joining us as always. Another fun one. We'll be back next Monday. Probably looking back on the week that was, as well as looking ahead to the All-Star break. Dan,
Hopefully bringing this guy
yep,
back out once
absolutely.
again.
And the plan is Daniel and I, we think tentatively Saturday night is when we'll do our live post-game show against one of those games against the Diamondbacks. So stay tuned for that. We're strategically going to pick a Diamondbacks game in hopes of, ensuring ourselves that we get a win. Somehow we'll find a way to do like a 16-inning loss or something like that, but we'll see. But that's Daniel Starkand. That's his broom. I'm Jeff Spiegel. We appreciate you watching as always. Ring the notification bell, click the subscribe button, tell your friends, and enjoy the week. Hopefully we get 7 more wins, 16-game win streak. We'll see what happens.
The best team holding a trophy high in the air. The Los Angeles Dodgers, champions of the baseball world.